so glad you're here. I've lived in New Jersey for now 26 years, and I did not grow up here. I grew up somewhere else that is very different from here, and I remember in March of the year of our Lord, 2000, when I moved down here and began actually my first season of ministry at Long Hill Chapel many years ago. And one of the things that you all need to know if you've lived here your entire life is this is not like other places. There are things that are very different. When you want to turn left, you need to go right. You have to be able to distinguish the difference between Taylor ham and pork roll, and where it's appropriate to use the right terminology for each of those. I remember I would try to drive around here. This is before GPS was like a thing. You know, only like really fancy people had GPS in their cars. And so we would print instructions out on the internet from MapQuest, and we'd be trying to figure out like what was a slight right. And some of you who are younger are like, man, that guy's super old, and you are right. I am. But I got lost constantly for like the first several months. And I would do this thing, and maybe you've done this. Have you noticed that New Jersey has like just 5 different names for roads? That's all they have. There's a Mountain Avenue here, there's a Mountain Avenue there, there's like all these Watchung Avenues, there's Springfield. The mistake I made early was I was like, oh, there's Mountain Avenue, I'm good, I know where that goes. No, that's the Mountain Avenue in one town, in one county, and there's a different Mountain Avenue over here, and you never know because the name of the road might change somewhere in the middle. And the point of this whole thing is, it is one thing to move to a place, and is a whole different thing to begin and be able to live there. So you can change your address, but it's a whole different activity. It's a whole different process. It's usually a longer one to begin to live in the place, to know how to do it, to know where to go, to know how to function, to know how to speak the language, all of the things that it takes to live in a place. Today we are beginning a new series. This is in the Old Testament book of Exodus, and it's called Becoming the People. And when we think of the book of Exodus, we think of the various movies that have been made by it. If you're of a certain generation, you remember Charlton Heston with his gigantic beard saying, "Let my people go." Or maybe you watched The Prince of Egypt if you're from my generation. Or if you're really into Christian Bale, there was a movie called Exodus Gods and Kings about 10 years ago that came out. And so we all have this picture of the book of Exodus like with these epic stories. God coming down in this fantastic way, parting the waters, providing for the people, a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. There are these big, grand, fantastic stories. And as we read them and as we're vaguely inspired by them, it is easy for us to forget and to miss what's really going on in this story of the book of Exodus. And it's this, that this is a people who are crossing over from slavery into freedom. They were slaves in bondage in Egypt. They crossed the river in that story that many of us know. They spend 40 years in the wilderness, and they eventually get to the border of this place called the Promised Land. But they cross over, but they don't act like free people yet. And the whole book is about those people becoming the people. There's a quote that's been attributed to several different preachers, and it goes something like this. It took one day to get the Hebrews out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get Egypt out of the Hebrews. It took one day for them to get across, but it took generations for that way of living, that way of thinking, that way of seeing the world, seeing other people, and seeing God to get out of them. And this is where it transitions to us because we're the same way. We as people are the same way. History doesn't necessarily repeat, but it very often rhymes. And so you and I, if we're followers of Jesus, we have crossed the river. We have been set free, but it is a whole separate thing for us to begin to live and to understand what it means to be free. Now you're saying, Michael, we live in the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we talk about freedom on July 4th and all the people who have sacrificed and fought for our freedom, and that's why this nation was founded. And you know what? I agree with you 100%. We all value this. But what is freedom really? Freedom is stepping away from the patterns of bondage, the patterns of enslavement, and living in a different way. And again, you're saying, Michael, I get that. I live free. I'm the captain of my own ship. I make my own decision. But it's deeper than that, because the world around us thinks differently about freedom. And you see this actually working itself out in our country right now. They think that, freedom is the absence of boundaries. It's the absence of restraint. There are many different ways that this manifests itself in our world. But think about that for a second. What if there truly were no boundaries? There were no laws. There were no limits. There were no restraints. There were no norms. There were no moral expectations, and there were no consequences. Would you want to live in a place like that? No, you wouldn't, and I wouldn't either, because it's a place that then becomes about consumption and actually destruction. It doesn't create flourishing. It creates the opposite of that. And this is where our definition of freedom gets a little bit stuck. Tim Keller, who is a pastor who's now passed on, but he pastored in New York City for many, many years, the mecca of where people would say us pursuing the American dream really belongs and originates in. He said this, he said, you are always bound to something. You're always bound to something. Freedom is not the absence, nor is it the presence of restrictions, but it's the presence of the right ones. You're always bound to something. And that rubs us the wrong way when we hear those words, because we don't like to be ruled. We don't like to be tied to something. But think about how you live your life for a second. You are always trading freedom back and forth for the things that you think you want, or the things that you think make your life better. Think about when you buy a new car. Allows you to get places, is fancy, you get to show up in style. Everybody's like, wow, look at that new car. But very often we finance these new cars, especially now with what they cost. And so what you're doing in a sense is you're getting something, but you're trading away something else. You're creating an obligation for yourself so that you can have something that feels like freedom. If you work somewhere, you do the same thing. You are trading a portion of your life, literally, your time, for something that you think will give you more options, will make your life better. So what if God's freedom doesn't quite work like all of these other ones? What if it doesn't work the way that we think that it does? As we journey in this book of Exodus, we'll find that this is something God offers to us. It's something we need to step into, but then we need to learn how to live there. And there's a piece of this for every one of us. Today, we're going to read from Exodus chapter 14, verses 1 through 22, and I'm going to invite Trish O'Kane up to read for us.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am Lord." So the Israelites did this. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all of them other chariots of Egypt, with the officers all over them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptian, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Lord Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." The Egyptians you see today will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen." The angel of God, who had been traveling in the front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, and cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all the night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left.
Thank you, Trish. And so this is the ending part of the parts of the story that we know, that the Hebrew people had gone to Egypt. They'd originally done this some generations ago because there was a famine in the land, and they began to prosper there. They began to grow in numbers and in influence. And the Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt at that point, was benevolent to them. He looked at them favorably. But then there was a regime change that happened somewhere along the line, and the succeeding Pharaoh and some of the leaders and the people began to look at this Hebrew contingent that was in Egypt, and they said, you know what, they're growing in number, they're growing in influence, they're eventually going to take over if we're not careful. And so over time they enslaved the people of God, and they began to rule over them and use them to do all the things that nobody else wanted to do. In the midst of that, God raised up a man named Moses, who had actually grown up in Egypt, the prince of Egypt, and he was made a leader and a spokesperson for God among his people. And this is where we remember those stories of Moses coming to Pharaoh and saying, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh saying, "Nope, not going to do it." And then God inflicts these plagues on the Egyptians, and it goes on and it goes back and it goes forth. And eventually Pharaoh has enough, and he says, "You know what? Get on out. I'm going to let you go because I don't want to deal with this anymore." And so the people begin to leave. They begin to head out of Egypt, and they start to head to the east. And then we pick up our story where we were, where Pharaoh and everybody looks around and says, "You know what, that was kind of a good deal, those people that we had who were doing all those things that we didn't want to do." And then he starts to go out after them. The reason he does this is because their captivity was useful to him. He says this, he says, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. If you look at this on a map, the Israelite people are headed east, and they're headed towards the very end of what we now know as the Red Sea. There's these little kind of rabbit ears that stick up in the Red Sea, and they head towards that shore, and I don't think they have a plan for how they're going to get across. I think they're praying a prayer to God that goes something like this: "God, provide a boat. God, give us a big cruise ship sized boat so we can get across the sea." Sometimes when we are going from somewhere to something and we know there's an obstacle in front of us and we know it's up there somewhere, we start praying prayers like this too. We're like, "God, provide the thing that I think I need." And then God does this really unhappy, unfortunate thing if you're looking at your life that way. He says, "You know what? You're running away. You know the Egyptians are starting to come behind you. You know what you ought to do is you ought to turn around. You ought to turn around and you ought to set up camp in this place called Pi Hahiroth." If you look at your map, you notice that this is still in Egypt. It's not across the sea. It's not in the land of freedom. It's still in the place of bondage. And if you were them and I were them, we would be looking at God and saying, do you know about geography? Do you see where this is? We want to be over there. You have us stopping over here. And this is the first clue that maybe freedom doesn't look the way that we thought that it did. Because what God is saying to them, and I think what he's saying to you, and me is this: stop and turn around for a moment. Why? Because I want you to stay where I am. I want you to stay where I am. You're in the midst of circumstances you don't prefer, but I'm there with you. My presence is with you. The Israelites knew that God was present with them. There was this pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And so God says, slow down, turn around, because I'm with you. And maybe that's what your life feels like today. It feels like confusion. You prayed the same kind of give me a boat prayer that the Israelites prayed, and you feel like God didn't come through. Your life has actually gotten more confusing. The threats, the imminent things that are coming your way feel like they're bigger and stronger and closer. But what if, for God, that wasn't an ending point, but was a starting point? Not for you to run and leave, but to stay, but stay with God. You know, there's another important thing for us to see here, and I want you to get this. Pharaoh sets out once he realizes what he's lost. And so there are people in your life, there are forces, there are circumstances that when you start living in the freedom that God has for you, those will come after you with knives out. They'll come after you. Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a circumstance, maybe it's a pattern and a way of living. You know, we can think of the big ones. We can think of things like addiction and oppression and patterns of sin in our life, but there's a lot of much smaller ones too. That living in faith, living before God that way, is actually hard. We don't see the results right away. And so you can count on this. You can count on the fact that if you start to walk into a new future and a new pattern, if you take a step of faith, if you follow Jesus, those things are going to come after you with abandon, with knives out. And the reason for it is the same reason that this was true for Pharaoh, because your captivity is useful to them. Your captivity, you staying the way you are, you staying in the place that you are, you doing the things that you do, you having the patterns that you continue to have, it is useful to them. And I think this is more than just circumstances, by the way. I think actually that Satan, the enemy of your soul, opposes you. You know, and in our advanced, modern, free place that we live in, we need to not forget that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against powers and principalities and the unseen, because especially if you're a follower of Jesus, the enemy of your soul wants to try to destroy you. And so this is why it is so important for us to understand this. Here's the good news, though. You didn't set you free. God did. You didn't set you free. God did. You didn't figure it out on your own. God was the one who broke the chains, who opened the door, who allowed you to cross over from death into life, who made that possible by the finished work of Jesus on the cross. And so you didn't do this. God did. He led those people out. He will lead you out. He'll stay with you. And because of that, wherever you are, even if it feels like you're still in Egypt, you can stand with him. But the Israelites, they don't do that. They see Pharaoh, they see his 600 chariots, they see his army, and they immediately forgot everything they've just seen. They've seen God do these incredible things. They've seen him in the plagues. They've seen him in the provision. They've seen him in the fact that Pharaoh, whose heart was hardened, finally lets them go. They've seen God be faithful and faithful and faithful and faithful. And suddenly they see him in the rearview mirror and they're like, you know what? It would have been better if we died in Egypt. Look what it says in verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were what? They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out into the desert to die? They've forgotten the whole plot, and they've done it quickly. Why have you done this to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. You know what's true about me is I have a very short memory. I have a shockingly short memory. I don't know what I did 10 minutes ago. But there's also this part of the human condition. There's this part of us that when it comes to God's faithfulness, we have very short memories. We have very short memories because we see the new circumstance come up and we're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? One of the best things you can do as a follower of Jesus is rehearse the faithfulness of God. It's one of the reasons we gather. It's one of the reasons we sing the songs that we do. It's one of the reasons we have relationships with each other. The church is not just me talking and them playing some songs and your kids going downstairs for a lesson. It's much bigger than that because we need to remind ourselves and we need to remind each other of how God has been faithful over and over and over again. And he was faithful back there and he'll be faithful up here with us. But when you begin to walk in freedom, there will be things that terrify you. There will be things that very easily cause you to forget what you've already experienced from God. One of the interesting things about this story of the Israelites is this will be far from the last time they make kind of a similar pity party for themselves. 2 chapters later, God parts the Red Seas. He comes through. He provides miraculously in a way that only God can. And 2 chapters later, they're kind of back at the same place. They're like, this is terrible. We're going to die. We should have stayed back there. How awful, how awful. And once again, God provides again. One of the things we are is we're predisposed towards this very short view of what God does. We're predisposed towards the big splash. We want the movie highlight trailer version of God, where he does the big thing, and when it gets into walking faithfully after the last thing and before the next thing, that is where it gets very hard for us, because God can deliver you in a moment, but he forms you over time. He can deliver you from the thing in the moment. He can set your feet on solid ground, but then there's a journey that follows. You can cross over from Egypt, but it takes a long time, and I would dare say it takes a lifetime to become the people of God. But as we're in that place, as these ancient people were in that place, but as you and I are in the place where maybe we have shoved off from the shore of comfortability. We've shoved off from the shore of the pattern that we lived in. We've shoved off from the shore, and here's where this applies to many of us, from the pattern that the world around us says, you need to be that and do that and acquire that and live there, and your life needs to look like this for you to be considered meaningful and successful. And people of God, you can shove off from the shore of that and know that God is with you. The circumstances might not seem better. It might seem like you're still in Egypt, but God is with you. And at the right time, you'll see the next door open. So look at verses 13 and 14. What do we do in the meantime with that? God gives us a clue in his words to these ancient people. He says this, do not be afraid, stand firm. Do not be afraid, stand firm. He says, do not be afraid, because there's lots of reasons to do that. This is one of the phrases that occurs over and over and over and over again throughout the scriptures. At least more than 100 times it does it. And it's because there's a lot in life that would cause us to draw our breath in when we see the circumstances, when we see the medical diagnosis, when we see the economy, when we see what's going on in the world, when we see uncertainty, when we see unrest, when we see struggle, when we see physical struggle and suffering. It is easy for us, maybe not to shake in fear, because many of us don't do that, but to draw in, to look down. And God is saying, don't look down, look up and stand firm. And if you do that, you'll see the deliverance of the Lord. This thing you see in your rearview mirror, you'll never see again. Why? Because you've got the answers, because you've got the strength, because you have the understanding, because you have the perspective, because you're good enough, because you're smart enough, because you're tenacious enough, because you're successful enough. No, because the Lord will fight for you. The Lord will fight for you. The Lord will fight for you. All you need to do is be still, is to trust. And this is a lot easier said than done. So how do you become the people of God in this struggle? You do it by this. God forms you by standing and by staying. God forms you by standing and by staying. God forms you by standing up and standing firm, but then being faithful in the place that he has you, in the door that he's opened for you, in this step now and not that one there. Not looking so far ahead to the future that we forget that God is with us in the present. And even though many of us would love to be across the river already, that God is with you. You don't need to worry about those back there because God will fight for you if only you will stand and stay. Stand firm. Do not be afraid. Stay. Don't go back. The thing that happens immediately with these people, and you see it over and over again in the complaints, and it also happens with us, is when we get out into unfamiliar territory, the thing that we immediately want to do is get back where it's comfortable. We want to go back to what we know. Or some of us, we want to get across the river as fast as we can because none of us like uncertainty. There's a group of you here who want to stay, but there's a group of you here who want to jump ahead as quickly as you can, and it seems like faith. It seems like faith to say, I'm just praying about it. I'm waiting on God. I've been doing it for like 3 decades, but I'm praying about it and waiting on God. Maybe the thing God has said to you is something he's already told you, that you need to step out in faith. You won't see it yet. You're waiting for the pillar of fire. You're waiting for the big spectacle. God is saying, take the step. And it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be uncertain. And you don't know how it all works, but I'm with you. For some of us, we're like, I'm going to jump across the obstacle and I'm going to climb the mountain and I'm going to achieve. And, that's going to be a great thing because I'm going to do great things for God. And God's like, you know what? Slow your roll, turn around, set up camp, and wait for me. And the root of both of these things is we don't like to not be in control. We want to get back into control as soon as we possibly can. And the biggest thing people of Chatham, Madison, Milburn, Summit, New Providence, Berkeley Heights, Morristown, Long Hill Township, and all of the other places we live that will keep us from seeing the movement of God, the fullness of God, is our desire to stay in control. And add a little bit of God to it, and come to church and sing the songs and praise his holy name, but really be the masters of our own lives. Standing is not just standing where we're comfortable. It's not just staying where we're comfortable. It's standing and staying with wherever God is. He'll do the miracle, but maybe not in the way you ever expected. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. As we close, there's one last thing that we see in this passage. It's at the very end. Look at verse 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Now before, it said, God was like, turn around, set up camp, don't move. And now he's saying, go ahead and move. What's the difference? The difference is they're not trying to run ahead of God. They've slowed down and they've waited for God, and now they can get up again, they can keep moving, they can keep doing it, they can step out, they can keep becoming the people. And so standing firm isn't stopping. It's a character we develop as we're moving. It's not stopping. It's this thing that we develop as we're moving. I think sometimes, we want to see the miracle first and then we'll move. We're like, God, show up, show us the thing, and then I'll have the confidence to move out. And God says this, he says, start moving. Don't get ahead of me, go with me, but then you'll see the miracle. And in our story, that is exactly what happens. Because after that, at the end of the story is when the waters part. They don't part at the beginning. They part at the end. It's not the first thing. It's actually one of the last things. And some of you have been holding on. You feel like you're hemmed in against the waters with the Egyptians behind you. Know this morning, as you hear these words, that God will be faithful. That at the right time, in the right way, the waters will part. But in the meantime, God is with you. Because true freedom, it begins and it ends with faith. True freedom begins and it ends with faith. It begins and it ends. And, I don't just mean Christian faith, I mean that too. I mean faith in something that you don't see yet, that you don't necessarily feel yet, that you don't know how it works yet. In those moments, the temptation will always be to go back. But in the meantime, in your life, answer these questions. Where do you need to stand firm? Where do you need to stand firm in the place that God has already put you, even if it feels like it's still in Egypt? And where might be God calling you to stay? Not to stay in an abusive place or a destructive place, but to stay with Him, not get out ahead of Him. And as you do those things, as you consider those questions, remember that God is with you. His presence is with you like that pillar of cloud and that pillar of fire. He never left, and He will be faithful to you. So as you learn to live, as you become the people, have faith, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Let's pray together. God, I believe in a room like this, with people watching this online, there's things that seem small, and we would look at them and say, that's not even a struggle that God sees, that God thinks is worthwhile. And I pray by your Spirit you would remind us that all the struggles that you've placed us in, that we feel like we're in, that we feel stuck in, are worthwhile to you. But for a few of us, maybe this is a really big one. This is a relationship or something that we're facing in our bodies or in our lives, in our workplace. It's uncertainty about the future. It's remembrance of the things in the past that we would never want to confront and face again. I pray that you would remind us each that you're with us, whether we're taking a step of faith into a new venture, into a new season, or whether we're trying to contend with what our lives already are, that you'll fight for us. We only need to be still, stand firm, have faith. Spirit, I pray you'd be at work in our hearts, to remind us of what's true, and then together you'd give us the courage to walk with you every step of the way. We pray in Jesus' name.